The summer I turned 22 was supposed to be like every other one before it. Long, dull, and predictable. I spent my days working at my dad's hardware store for almost nothing, living under his roof because, according to him, and the bank, college was a waste of time and money. Being at home meant being the family's punching bag. My brother, Caleb Mercer, was the golden child. He could do no wrong. I was the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up, no matter what I did. We weren't exactly poor, but we weren't the kind of people who took vacations or splurged on things like new clothes or amusement parks. So when my dad, Thomas Mercer, suddenly announced that we were taking a family road trip to Colorado for my uncle's wedding, I should have realized something wasn't right. 3 days into that miserable trip, I already wished I'd lied and said I had to work. Dad and Caleb made a game out of making my life hell. Every joke had me as the punchline. Every car ride turned into an interrogation about what a failure I was. Mom, Margaret Mercer, would occasionally whisper "that's enough" in that frail, performative voice of hers, but we all knew she wouldn't actually stop them. My father wasn't your average cruel man. Thomas was something worse. He was the kind who'd wake you at 3 in the morning to scream about the trash not being taken out. The kind who'd throw away your things if they were left out for a minute too long. The kind who'd look you dead in the eye and tell you you'd never amount to anything, and then laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. Caleb caught on quick. If you weren't like Dad, you'd end up like me. So he became Dad's little clone. That morning in Colorado, we stopped at some half-forgotten rest area. There were endless fields stretching out into the distance, mountains on the horizon, and a sad-looking building with flickering fluorescent lights and a pair of vending machines that probably hadn't worked. His daughters couldn't bear the sight of weakness. Too messy, too real. Clara, my wife, claimed she was drowning in meetings. Her sisters were busy with their families. None of them could spare time for the man who had built the life they all flaunted. So it was me, Daniel Hayes, who sat by his bedside, feeding him, changing sheets that smelled of medicine and fading pride. At first, I did it out of obligation. But duty has a way of reshaping itself when you spend long nights in silence with a dying man. He began to talk to me, not as a son-in-law, but as a man who had built and lost, who knew the loneliness of being surrounded by people who loved what he gave them, not who he was. He spoke of the company, the good years, the betrayals, the boardroom vultures who smiled as they sharpened their knives. He spoke of mistakes, of trust misplaced in blood. And one night, as rain whispered against the window, he said softly, almost to himself, "They'll sell everything the moment I'm gone. You're the only one who still sees me." I didn't answer, but I never forgot. When Edward passed, grief in that house became performance art. Clara cried when people were watching. Her sisters posted poetic captions online, as if hashtags could manufacture sincerity. Even at the funeral, the tears were rehearsed, perfect, public, hollow. I stood back, silent, as their cameras clicked beside the coffin. The priest's voice blurred into the background hum of fake grief. That's when I found the voicemail. "Dad's gone. Finally. Maybe now we can sell that useless company and move to Dubai." I walked over to that woman and asked to borrow her phone. But I didn't call my family. I called a homeless shelter in Grand Junction about 40 miles away. I told her my family had to leave suddenly and that someone was coming to pick me up later. She hesitated but ended up offering me a ride into town. That night, I slept in a shelter for the first time. No phone, no ID, no money, just the clothes on my back. A guy named Jake, who worked there, let me use their computer to look up how to get a replacement ID and find nearby jobs that paid cash. The next morning, I walked into a diner called Sonny's and asked if they needed help. The owner, Rita Hale, was a 60-year-old woman with silver hair streaked purple and arms covered in tattoos. She looked me up and down and said, "The dishwasher quit yesterday. You steal from me, you're dead. Start now." And just like that, I had a job. For the first time in my life, I was making my own choices, even if they were small ones. A week later, my new phone, a cheap prepaid one from Walmart, started ringing. It was Mom. Her voice was trembling. "Noah, where are you? We've been looking everywhere." She said it was all just a prank. a joke, that they'd driven down the road to scare me. But when they came back, I was gone. In the background, I could hear Dad's voice barking, "Tell him to stop being dramatic and get his ass to Uncle Daniel's." Caleb was laughing. I listened for a moment, and then I said, "You wanted to see if I could make it on my own, right? Sweetheart. Then watch me." And I hung up. I blocked every number, changed my phone number completely the next day, and decided I was done. Within a month, I had my own tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It always smelled like detergent, but it was mine. I kept working, moved up from dishwasher to line cook. Rita taught me how to chop vegetables properly, how to bake, how to show up even when you're tired. Sometimes I'd check my old email. Every day that passed, I prepared in silence. I met with Edward's loyal employees, men and women who remembered the way he ran things before greed crept in. I assured them the company's heart wasn't gone, merely misplaced. Slowly, quietly, I built alliances. When Clara mocked me for playing with the old paperwork, I just smiled. She didn't realize I was rewriting her future. The day of the will reading arrived wrapped in cold sunlight, the kind of day that looks bright but feels empty. Clara entered the lawyer's office dressed for victory. Cream blazer, diamond earrings, a confidence that could light a room. Her sisters followed, radiant and smug. They laughed as they settled into their seats, whispering about what they'd buy first. The lawyer began reading. The smaller assets, the lake house, the cars, the art collections went first. Their smiles grew wider. Then he paused, cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, adjusting his glasses, "per Mr. Langford's secondary trust amendment, controlling interest in Langford Industries transfers to the named executor of his personal estate, Mr. Daniel Hayes." The room froze. Clara blinked, her face twitching in disbelief. What does that mean?" she stammered. "It means," Harold replied evenly, "your husband owns the company. You and your sisters inherit non-voting shares. In short, Mrs. Hayes, he's your boss." The silence that followed was deafening. The confidence drained from Clara's face. Her sisters turned on her instantly, whispering, then accusing, then shouting. I sat still, quiet, watching. Their laughter, the one that had cut me earlier, was gone now, swallowed by panic. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. "Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. Your father-in-law spoke very highly of your loyalty." I took it without a smile. No satisfaction, just a nod. Clara's voice trembled. You planned this." I met her eyes and said quietly, "No, he did. I just didn't stop him." The weeks that followed were chaos. The sisters tried to fight it, of course. Screaming lawyers, forged documents, desperate phone calls. But the paper trail was clear, the signatures hers. Every attempt to undo what she'd done only tightened the knot she'd tied around herself. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching them realize that their greed had built my throne was satisfaction enough. At night, Clara's laughter was gone. She'd sit in silence, staring at the wall, her wine untouched. Sometimes she'd glance at me like she was seeing a ghost. Maybe she was the ghost of the man she thought she could humiliate and outlive. One night, I drove out to the farmhouse Edward had left me. It was raining again. Soft, steady, cleansing. The kind of rain that erases footsteps and memories. The farmhouse wasn't much. Peeling paint, creaky floors, the faint smell of soil and rain-soaked wood. But it was mine. And in its quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the furniture. The photographs, the traces of a life built on work instead of vanity. In the corner of the old study sat Edward's leather chair. I ran my hand over the worn armrest. For the first time in years, I let myself feel it, the weight of everything. The betrayal, the loss, the justice. He had seen them for who they were long before I did. And in the end, he left it all to the one person who stayed when there was nothing left to gain. The next morning, I walked the fields behind the house. The sky was wide and gray, the air sharp and honest. I thought about how money changes people, how power reveals who they've always been. Clara used to say, "Money changes people." She was right. It didn't change me. It revealed me. In the city, they still whispered about me. The quiet man who became an empire overnight. Some called it luck. Others called it manipulation. But Edward would have called it loyalty. The board learned quickly that silence was not weakness. They respected me in the way people respect inevitability. Weeks later, Clara showed up at the farmhouse. The car tires crunched against the gravel. She stepped out, dressed simply, no makeup, no jewelry. The first time I'd ever seen her stripped of her armor. She stood at the edge of the porch, staring at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. "You really did it," she whispered. "You actually took everything." I looked at her, the woman who once thought I was beneath her, who measured worth in dollars and names, and said, "No, Clara, you gave it away." Her eyes filled with something, not regret, not anger, something emptier. "I loved you," she said weakly.
No, Irraplia.
"You loved winning." She didn't argue. She just turned and walked back to her car. For a brief second, I thought I saw tears. Then she was gone. I watched her drive away until the sound of the engine disappeared into the distance. That night, I sat on the porch again. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the fields. In my hand, the deed to Langford Industries caught the silver glow. I thought about Edward, about the night he told me I was the only one who still saw him. I wished I'd said more that night, that I'd told him what he meant. So I whispered it then, to the wind, to the fields, to the ghost of the man who had seen something in me no one else did. "Thank you." And for the first time in years, I meant every word. Then I went inside, closed the door behind me, and finally, quietly, took care of her, too. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the same precision she once used to mock me. The divorce papers were ready, her access to the accounts revoked. The world that once revolved around her name simply stopped. By morning, Clara Langford Hayes was no one. As dawn broke over the fields, I sat at Edward's old desk. Sunlight filtered through the dusty curtains, catching the edge of the framed company seal hanging on the wall. Langford Industries. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was proof that loyalty outlives arrogance, that patience cuts deeper than power. I wasn't born into wealth. I wasn't raised for empire. But I understood something they never did. The quiet moments build empires louder than any boardroom. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a whisper. I imagined Edward's voice in it, proud, content. And as the day began, I knew I hadn't stolen his legacy. I had preserved it. The laughter that once humiliated me had turned to silence. And in that silence, I found everything I was ever meant to be.